The evening conference concluded, with life buzzing throughout the streets of San Francisco. Elon Musk alone, dressed in a black blazer and jeans, walked into the parking garage. The CEO was known to be unpredictable, but tonight at least he wore an ordinary guise. His baseball cap hid the right side of his face like most other convention-goers, while his tan skin shone under it. As he approached the corner of the garage, something caught his attention. A man sitting there on the curb holding a small cardboard sign saying, "Homeless veteran. Anything helps." The man in his late 50s was wearing a fraying green jacket, the type issued decades ago in the military. His boots were scuffed, his jeans were torn, and his face, lined with years of hardship, wore an expression that was at once calm and far away. Elon slowed his pace, curiosity piqued. He wasn't a stranger to seeing homelessness. The streets of San Francisco had tales to tell of struggle in numbers. Still, something about this man's composure seemed different. Instead of begging or shouting out to people passing by, he sat quietly, his sign resting against his knees, his eyes steady but not pleading. Elon hesitated for a moment before stepping closer. "Hey," he said, his voice breaking through the quiet hum of the nearby street. "Mind if I sit?" The man looked up, surprised. For a moment he seemed uncertain of how to react, but then shrugged minimally. "It's free sidewalk," he said in gravelly but not unkind voice. Elon sat on the curb, tucking his knees toward his chest. "What is your name?" he asked. "Bernie," he answered. "And you?" "Elon," he responded. There was no flash of recognition in Bernie's expression, which Elon found oddly refreshing for once. He wasn't being treated like a headline. Bernie raised an eyebrow. "What brings a guy like you to the curb?" Elon chuckled softly. "Just curious, I guess. You look like you've got a story." Bernie leaned back slightly, folding his arms over his chest. "Doesn't everyone?" "Fair point," Elon said. "What's yours?" Bernie regarded him for a moment before talking. "Marine Corps. Served for 20 years, Afghanistan, Iraq, you name it. Got out with nothing but a pension and some scars you can't see. The pension didn't last, neither did my wife." He nodded to the sign on his side. "Been out here for a while now." Elon nodded, letting the words sink in. "That's a hard road." Bernie smirked, though there was no humor in it. "Could have been worse." Still breathing. For a moment the two men sat in silence, the sounds of the city filling the gap. Elon glanced at the sign again, then back at Bernie. "You have a calmness about you," he said. "Most people in your situation would be yelling or trying to grab attention." Bernie shrugged again. "Doesn't do much good. Undefined people either see you or they don't." Elon's phone buzzed in his pocket, but he ignored it. Undefined instead. He leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees. "Undefined, so, what do you need, Bernie?" "Undefined, what would help?" "Undefined." Bernie hesitated, his eyes narrowing slightly. "Undefined, why do you care?" "Because I can," Elon said simply. Bernie stared at Elon for a moment, searching his face for some hidden motive. That he had met his fair share of people who stopped to talk. Some out of pity, others to preach, but something about this man seemed different. Reluctantly he exhaled, leaning back against the wall. "What would help?" Bernie repeated, almost as if testing the question. He scratched his beard, the gray strands catching the streetlights. "That's not something I've been asked in a while." Elon waited silently, giving Bernie the space to gather his thoughts. The man shifted on the curb, then gestured toward the skyline. "I had a life, you know. A real one. House, wife, 2 kids. Marine Corps kept me going, gave me purpose. But purpose doesn't mean much when your mind doesn't let you rest." "PTSD?" Elon asked gently. Bernie nodded. "Yeah. It's like a shadow that doesn't go away. Every loud sound, every crowded room, I'm right back there." He tapped his temple with 2 fingers. "Doctors tried to help. Pills, therapy, but it doesn't change what you've seen, what you've done." Elon leaned forward, his elbows resting on his knees. "And your family?" Bernie's lips pressed into a thin line, his gaze dropping to the ground. "I pushed them away. Didn't mean to, but that's what happens. My wife, Janet, she held on as long as she could. But when I couldn't get a job and the bills piled up, she left. Took the kids. I don't blame her." Elon frowned slightly but said nothing. He sensed Bernie needed to get the words out. "After that, it was a slow fall," Bernie continued. "The house went next, then the car. I tried everything, warehouse jobs, night shifts, whatever I could get. But people don't want to hire a guy like me." He gestured to himself, the fraying jacket and worn-out boots. "Once you're out here, it's like the world decides you're invisible." Elon's gaze didn't waver. "But you haven't given up." Bernie chuckled dryly. "You call this not giving up?" He held up his sign, the cardboard edges bent and soft from use. This is survival, not living. Still, Elon said, you're here. You're still showing up. Bernie looked at him, his expression softening. What else is there? The streets aren't kind, but I've seen worse. Elon tilted his head, intrigued. What do you mean? Bernie shifted again, rubbing his hands together against the chill of the evening air. You'd think being homeless is the worst thing that could happen. It's not. I've seen good men I fought beside lose their minds. Some of them didn't make it. Some of them ended up like me. But I'm still here. That counts for something, right? It does, Elon said, his voice steady. It counts for a lot. The two men sat quietly for a moment, the sound of distant traffic filling the space between them. Elon broke the silence. So if you could have anything, what would it be? Bernie blinked, caught off guard by the directness of the question. He hesitated, his fingers fidgeting with the edges of his sign. Honestly? A chance to work again. To feel useful. I've got skills, mechanical ones. Used to fix cars, motorcycles, even farm equipment. If I had a little shop, tools, maybe some clients, I could start over. Elon nodded thoughtfully. Why haven't you tried? Bernie shrugged, a small, bitter smile playing on his lips. Takes money to start something like that, and out here. He gestured at his surroundings. Money's hard to come by. Elon leaned back, pulling out his phone. All right, he said, scrolling through his contacts. Bernie raised an eyebrow. All right, what? Let's start with housing, Elon replied, tapping on his screen. I know a place that can help. It's temporary, but it's clean, safe, and a good place to get back on your feet. Bernie blinked, his skeptical expression melting into one of cautious hope. You're serious? Elon glanced up, a small smile tugging at the corner of his mouth. I don't say things I don't mean. Bernie stared at him, the weight of years spent being ignored and dismissed making it hard to believe this moment was real. But something in Elon's tone, his calm determination, made Bernie believe just a little. All right, Bernie said, his voice almost a whisper. Let's see where this goes. Elon's fingers moved quickly over his phone screen as Bernie sat in silence, watching him with a mixture of curiosity and disbelief. Moments later, Elon raised the phone to his ear. Hi, it's Elon, he said, his tone calm but direct. I need a favor. Bernie couldn't make out the conversation, but from Elon's side, it sounded serious. Words like emergency housing and veteran support floated through the air, each one hitting Bernie like a foreign concept. No one had spoken those words for him in years. After a few minutes, Elon hung up and turned back to Bernie. All right, he said, slipping his phone into his pocket. There's a place called Horizon Haven. It's a veteran support center about 10 blocks from here. They'll have a bed ready for you tonight. Bernie looked at him, shocked. Like that? Elon shrugged a little. It's not much, but it's something. You get food, a warm place to lie down, and people who can help figure out what to do next. Bernie's hand clenched around the edge of his sign. Well, right now, just the thought of that sparked a small wave of pride. He wasn't used to accepting anything. Why are you doing this? He asked, his voice tinged with suspicion. Because I can, Elon replied simply, and because someone should. Bernie lowered his gaze, his grip on the sign relaxing. I don't know what to say. You don't have to say anything, Elon said, but I'm not done yet. Bernie's head snapped up. Undefined, what do you mean? Undefined. Elon pulled out his phone again, this time scrolling through emails. You said you wanted a shop, right? Undefined, to fix things? Undefined. Bernie nodded hesitantly. Undefined, yeah, but like I said, that's a pipe dream. Elon tapped the screen, then held the phone out to Bernie. Undefined, on it was a list of local commercial spaces for rent. Undefined, pick one, Elon said. Undefined. Bernie froze, staring at the screen. Undefined, are you joking? Undefined, do I look like I'm joking? Undefined. Elon asked, a small smile on his face. Undefined. Bernie hesitated, his mind racing. I can't afford anything like this. You don't have to, Elon said, lowering the phone. I'll cover the first 6 months' rent. After that, it's on you to make it work. Bernie's breath caught in his throat. He looked at Elon, searching for any hint of insincerity, but all he saw was quiet determination. You do that for me? For someone you just met? You're not just someone, Elon replied. You're a Marine. You've served your country, and now it's time someone served you. For the first time in years, Bernie felt tears prickling at the corners of his eyes. He quickly wiped them away, clearing his throat. I don't know what to say. Say you'll try, Elon said. Bernie let out a shaky laugh. All right, I'll try. Elon stood, extending a hand to help Bernie to his feet. Good. Let's get you to Horizon Haven first, and then we can figure out the rest. Bernie took Elon's hand, and the simple act of holding on to him grounded Elon in the reality of the moment. For the first time in what felt like forever, he allowed himself to hope. 2 weeks later, Bernie stood in the middle of a modest garage in Oakland, California. Oil and metal smells filled the air, and big windows were streaked by dust. Wall-to-wall shelves stood brimming with wrenches and hammers, not to mention all kinds of tools he hadn't used in years. Here sat, off in a corner, an old motorcycle on a lift, waiting presumably for Bernie to come along and lovingly nurture it. He slid his hand along the workbench, waves of gratitude and doubt washing over him. This was his shop. This was his second chance. It wasn't much yet, but it was his. The sign out front said Bernie's repairs bikes, cars, and more. Elon had gotten everything in order, from first month's rent to an inventory of tools and supplies. Now it was up to Bernie to make it work. A knock on the open garage door pulled Bernie from his thoughts. He turned to see a middle-aged man with salt and pepper hair holding a clipboard. "You Bernie?" "That's me," Bernie replied, walking over. "Name's Mike," the man said, shaking Bernie's hand firmly. "I run a construction company down the road. Elon mentioned you might be able to help us with our fleet." Bernie blinked. "Fleet?" Mike chuckled. "Yeah, about a dozen trucks. They're always breaking down, and it costs a fortune to get them serviced at the big shops. If you can handle the work, I'd rather bring it to someone local." Bernie's chest tightened, not from fear but from excitement. "I can handle it," he said confidently. "Bring one in and I'll show you what I can do." Mike grinned. "Sounds good. I'll send over the first one this afternoon." As Mike left, Bernie leaned against the workbench, shaking his head in amazement. It hadn't even been a full month, and he already had his first major client. He thought back to that night on the curb, to Elon sitting beside him and asking what he needed. At the time it had felt like a dream. Now it was his reality. Later that week, Bernie was adjusting a carburetor when a familiar figure appeared at the door. Elon stepped inside, wearing his usual black t-shirt and jeans, a small smile on his face. "How's it going, Bernie?" Bernie wiped his hands on a rag, grinning. "Better than I ever expected. Got my first big client already. Mike from the construction company." "How'd you know?" Elon smirked. "I might have mentioned you to him. Figured you could use a boost." Bernie laughed, shaking his head. "You're something else, you know that?" "Just making sure you have the tools to succeed," Elon said, his tone casual but sincere. He glanced around the shop, taking in the organized chaos. "You've done a lot with the place." "It's a start," Bernie said, his voice filled with pride. "But it's mine, and that's what matters." Elon nodded, then reached into his pocket and pulled out a small envelope. "One more thing," he said, handing it to Bernie. "Undefined." Bernie opened it cautiously, his eyes widening as he pulled out a check. "Undefined, what's this for?" "Undefined, call it a safety net," Elon said. "That would be enough to cover another 6 months of rent, just in case things get slow. I know that starting a business is not easy, and I did not want you to feel like you were on your own." Bernie stared at the check, his throat tightening. "Elon, I don't know how to thank you," Bernie said. "You already have," Elon said matter-of-factly. "You've shown me what resilience looks like. Now it's my turn to support it." Months passed, and Bernie's shop was now the go-to place for the community. Activity filled the garage. Customers were dropping off vehicles, construction workers chatting while Bernie adjusted engines, and even kids from the local neighborhood stopping in to watch him work. The walls, now decorated with framed photos of Bernie's time in the Marine Corps and thank you notes from clients who appreciated his honesty and craftsmanship, silently spoke to what was going on within the man himself. Word got around fast regarding Bernie's metamorphosis. One day a local news reporter came out to cover his story. Cameras were set up recording the grease-streaked veteran proudly standing within his shop while he talked about the journey that brought him there. He didn't shy away from discussing the dark times, the struggles with PTSD, the loss of his family, and the years spent on the streets. But he also spoke with hope. "I thought I was invisible," Bernie told the reporter, "but that night someone saw me and it changed everything." The story went viral, with headlines praising both Bernie's determination and Elon's unexpected generosity. Social media was abuzz with the discussion on giving people a second chance and how one good deed could cascade to change lives. True to his nature, Elon was quiet about his role. When interviewed about it, he just said, "I didn't do much. Bernie already had the skills and the grit. I just gave him a platform to use them." For Bernie, the experience wasn't about rebuilding his life. It was about getting back on his feet and feeling purposeful. He began doing free repairs for veterans in need and collaborated with local organizations to offer training for young people interested in mechanical work. His shop was no longer just a business but a symbol of resilience and community. One evening, after closing up the shop, Bernie drove to Horizon Haven, the veteran support center that had been his first step off the streets. He walked in with a check made out to the center for a portion of his shop's profits. "This place saved me," Bernie told the staff. "Now I want to make sure it keeps saving others." The staff, many of whom had seen Bernie at his lowest, were moved to tears. His journey wasn't just a victory for himself. It was proof that even the smallest spark of hope could ignite a transformation. Back at the shop, Bernie sat on the same stool where he'd worked on his first repair months ago. The garage was quiet now, the tools neatly arranged and the hum of success settling in the air. He thought about the man who had sat beside him on the curb that night, asking a simple question, "What do you need?" For Bernie, the answer had been more than housing, more than a shop. It was a second chance to be seen, to be heard, and to be valued once again. Bernie's story reminds the world that nobody is completely invisible. Every single person has something important to tell. It's at times all it takes for life to be changed around in one single stroke, as his willingness to listen and do the right thing. Kindness plus action turns dark into hopeful chances of change.